Everyone, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. Appreciate y'all being here at this very early hour. The plan for our day is to work all the bills that have been assigned to the committee and to work them in numerical order. Taking care of the committee bills is the very first thing. We intend to get to every bill today, and we're just continuing from the morning to noon tonight. And appreciate your help with that. There are some bills that are they seem to be very non-controversial. It's been represented to the committee that these bills have kind of agreement by the parties. And in those instances, I hope we won't have to stretch it out, okay? Because it just makes it more difficult for the rest of the bills. Before we get started, there is a bill, it was Senate File 22. It is passed this committee and it is up in, ready for the Senate to be discussed today on general file. But there's a standing committee amendment, and my understanding, Madam Chairwoman Throne, that you have a tweak or more to the standing committee amendment. And why don't we listen to that first so that we all hear it? And the other members will be joining. We worked very late last night, so and Senator Scott warned that he'd be a little late coming in. Senator Barlow is presenting a bill in another committee, so we, especially on the committee bills, we will leave those bills open for those members to register their votes. Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday, when I tracked the standing committee amendment in, you might recall that.
Remind us what bill it is.
I'm sorry, Senate File 22.
Senate File 22.
Right, on electric reliability. And there was a verbal amendment towards the end of the meeting. And when I tracked it in, it didn't really work.
Okay.
So, and this, so I've got the standing committee amendment. And so on page 2, line 16.
Yes.
The amendment it makes a sentence that doesn't work.
Senator Barlow, we're dealing with Senate File 22, which I believe is Public Service Commission reliability.
Reliability.
Yeah, I think the commission's very reliable, actually. But
Flattery.
give me everywhere. The commission has a concern about something not reading correctly in the standing committee amendment. We're just kind of going over that real quick.
I'll be brief. I have to apologize. I left my handwritten copy at home, but or in the office. But essentially, the amendments to page 2, line 16.
Says delete dispatchable after Wyoming insert.
So the sentence would read, establish baseline standards for electric reliability related to adequate power in Wyoming with adequate dispatchable power to ensure reliability. I mean, it's just a sentence that doesn't make sense.
So we have a couple ways to fix that.
I had a pretty simple suggestion.
Okay.
Just delete the standing committee amendment and instead delete related on line 16 and after 2, just put in ensure. So it would read not later than December 15, 2024, establish baseline standards for electric reliability to ensure adequate, reliable, dispatchable power in Wyoming.
That sounds very good. So
And I have that written.
what we could do today is to divide the standing committee amendment on lines and separate out lines 1 through 3.
Right.
Ask the Senate to vote no and bring a committee of the whole amendment that would do what Madam Chairwoman says.
But we also had a problem with the amendment to D.
Okay?
And that's a little more complicated. So the amendment reads, in considering new or modified generation facilities for inclusion in a utilities investment, whoops. Sorry, I didn't have enough coffee this morning, Mr. Chairman. The commission may disallow the inclusion of some or all of the investment associated with non-dispatchable resources if those resources do not operate as projected and cause a failure to comply with reliability standards.
Okay.
So it would be virtually impossible to prove that a resource causes, a particular resource causes a violation of reliability standards.
I'll tell you what, this is getting way more complicated.
This one's
I
more
wanna go in.
complicated.
You're gonna have to just give us something in writing, and
And
let's move on to the next.
I did bring it in writing, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I wasn't really,
I was hoping we'd clear it up so that the audience could all see it, but it's just
I
too much.
I can discuss it with them, Mr. Chairman, but the first one's easy. You're
Okay,
correct.
so I guess the next bill for our consideration is Public Service Commission Integrated Resource Plans. Is that correct? I actually don't have my notice in front of me. I should have brought it. I really do need that notice. But Senate File 24, Public Service Commission Integrated Resource Plans. Is that correct? You guys remember
yes,
for the
Mr.
notice? Debbie, was that the first one on our list?
24 is yes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot. I need that today. All right. This is it's a product of the interim work. It relates to the review of integrated resource plans, and it puts a little bit more formality, I think, into the plan review. So with that, I would yield to Madam Chairwoman and the Public Service Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the only sort of structural concern we had with this one that's still lingering is on page 2, line 13, Romanet I, provide that the review shall be conducted in accordance with the Commission's rules of contested case and procedure, practice and procedure. That we don't need that and would prefer that it not be in there because we have, as you know, set procedure. We don't need to adopt new procedure for this, and we don't want to suggest that our procedures do not generally apply. So if we just delete those sentences.
Committee, are you, the Commissioner's suggestion on page 2, lines 13 through 15, delete that language. Anything else on the bill, Madam Chairwoman?
No, I mean, in general, we wouldn't necessarily need everything that's in B, but that's the only one that is just problematic.
Senator Boner.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it seems like in previous bills, you asked us to get rid of similar constructs where we tell you what the rules shall be. Is that not necessarily a problem with all the rest of paragraph B? It seems like, other bills you want to strike all of that.
Madam Chairwoman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, you're correct. We could delete all of B and it would be fine. That would be consistent with what you did in the all-source procurement. This just gives us more direct guidance on rulemaking than we really need.
So you would also like us to consider deleting lines 8 through 23 on page 2 and down to line 11 on page 3, the entirety of little b.
Yes,
Madam
Mr. Chairman.
Chairwoman.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions from the committee for the chairwoman? Would anyone else on the commission like to address this bill? All right, thank you very much. Who, how about from the utilities? Is there anybody here from the utilities who would like to address? Mr. Acey? And I'm assuming there wasn't any other agency discussion on this one. Okay. Mr. Acey, welcome. Mr. Casey, that's a good idea. Take a seat. Is Mr. Bush here this morning? Do you want to come up or? Mr. Acey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Bruce Acey, and I'm here today on behalf of Montana Dakota Utilities Company. We provide electrical services and gas in the northern part of the state. We have approximately 18,000 customers, and we stand partially in opposition to the bill, as we do not believe it is necessary. We believe that the present practice of the commission is acceptable and appropriate. And if I could, while we don't really have too many problems with the bill, other than it affects us, we believe that under the present policy, which is that if in fact a utility has a integrated resource plan that is filed in any state, that IRP is filed in the state of Wyoming for review. In Montana Dakota's situation, we obviously are headquartered out of Bismarck, and for the most part, whether it's in Montana or North Dakota or South Dakota, it's inevitably the case that an IRP is going to be filed in one of those jurisdictions. And when it's filed, perhaps in North Dakota, because it is an integrated plan, it is filed in Wyoming. And then once it's filed in Wyoming, it is reviewed. And if there's an issue with it, then it's discussed and reviewed. There can be a hearing on it so that we can address it as part of the process. We feel this is appropriate. We feel it gives the commission an opportunity to look at what the plans are for the company with respect to their resources and how they intend to accomplish these over time. And so we, I guess, object a little bit to the idea that we have to do this in the state of Wyoming and that it's going to be part of a process. The commission just suggested to you that the procedure associated with the contested case be removed. If that's the case, that would remove some of the, I guess, additional administrative burden that would be associated with it, so we would support that. But in the end, if you look at the bill itself, and it talks about under C, an affected electrical utility, it exempts the cooperatives. We could also do the same thing with respect to smaller utilities in the state. And while Montana Dakota is fairly large and has service in a number of states and other subsidiaries that serve elsewhere, in Wyoming, it's, has limited customers. And we could restrict that under affected electrical utilities to maybe those under 50,000 customers, something of that nature. Because there are utilities that would be impacted and not necessarily the focus of this bill. And with that, I would answer any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you, Mr. Acey. Questions for Mr. Acey? Anybody have questions? Thank you, sir. Mr. Kaysen.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Rick Kaysen with Rocky Mountain Power. Overall, we agree with the Public Service Commission that they have processes and procedures and rules already in place is what this bill is trying to achieve. As I have shared with this committee in prior meetings, an integrated resource plan is exactly that. It is a plan. It goes through a lot of scrutiny and a lot of different phases and everything else. So again, that scrutiny exists in all stages of planning. As I've also shared, integrated resource plans are ongoing. They are monitored as after filing with the Public Service Commission. It is not a one and done process. It does not sit on a shelf. And for a utility, as we look at it, it is a tool when we look at the resources needed to serve our customers. Rocky Mountain Power can accept the bill. We're already doing this in other states in which we operate. The thing we need to concentrate on is consistency, processes, efficiencies, and looking at those customer needs. So again, that's one thing that we would request the Public Service Commission when we operate in other states with the IRPs, that we would look for similar and, treatment for those efficiencies to avoid delays and costs. So with that, Mr. Chairman, try to answer questions you folks may have, if any.
Thank you, Mr. Kaysen. Questions for Mr. Kaysen? Questions for Mr. Kaysen? Let's go to Mr. Bush.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. David Bush with Black Hills Energy. Similar comments to my colleagues, and I appreciate the suggested changes from the commission as well. A couple of points that my regulatory group and energy procurement group have kind of brought up. Questions about on, let's see, page 4, line 7, there's a reference to demand side and supply side options as part of the planning process, and how we would talk about those. Demand side is, it's another word for conservation, basically. So it's a newer form of, I guess, trying to manage reliability, focused on people turning down or up their air conditioning, turning down their heat. It's not really a great way to try to manage for reliability, because it is somewhat unreliable. There's not any teeth in that. We can't make somebody do those things. And a lot of times, some of it involves, we have programs where we come out and look at someone's windows and doors, things like that, to see how their insulation is, to see if there's a way to improve their efficiencies. So with that term is not really something that I think we would look at as far as the ability to provide decent power. I think the one comment from one of my folks was there's maybe about 10 megawatts worth of demand side management that could happen in Cheyenne. And we're at about 275 megawatts daily, so it's not a huge piece of the pie. So there's just some questions around that, how that would play in. Another piece is the cost benefit analysis. I didn't get as much detail as I'd hoped, and I tried to get some of my folks here, but they were unfortunately not able to make it. But there's just some questions around the cost benefit analysis and how that would, how they would sort of flesh that out. And I don't know if the commission has more experience with that sort of a term that maybe they could shed some light on, but these are just some of the questions that my folks brought up on my end. And then the overall cost of doing this, that may be alleviated some with some of the changes already suggested by the commission. But when we do this in Colorado, the last time we did it, it was about a $2 million process, which involved many of the steps that's involved in the bill when it comes to contested case filings, third-party evaluators, things like that. We were closer to $1 million when we had to do the one here. So it's a significant cost increase when you bring in more people and you have more steps in the process, I guess is the best way of putting it. So just some things to consider, Mr. Chairman. I think overall it's more work, and as we've heard, the commission has a lot of the authority to do the things that they've done. And I think we also can look at this summer or fall, the rate case that was in the headlines quite a bit. I would say the commission did their work. They took a roughly 30% rate increase and trimmed it to about 5%. So that's a pretty significant reduction, and I think shows also that the commission has a lot of authority and a lot of tools in their toolbox that we're trying to give them here that they probably already have. So with that, Mr. Chairman,
Thank you, Mr. Bush.
that's all I got.
I'm glad you didn't bring Mr. Smith this morning. Anyway, that's an inside joke. Any questions for Mr. Bush? Any questions for Mr. Bush? Mr. Bush, I got to go down a little bit on this, some of the discussion you raised. Do you serve any customers in Cheyenne under an interruptible tariff?
We have one customer on our blockchain interruptible service tariff that I know of.
And so, Mr. Bush, how big's that customer? Without revealing maybe that
I
competitive
believe
information.
they're about 45 megawatts right now.
So, Mr. Bush, you don't consider that a demand-side strategy, to be able to interrupt that customer?
That is,
Back to
sir,
you.
but, sorry, Mr. Chairman, that is a specific contract that we have with that person, which is what I think our team is saying, is if we're gonna do demand-side management, there needs to be some contract or some teeth put into that for curtailment, and we're just not sure how that's gonna work with this bill, so.
I guess the point I would make is that single demand-side strategy that you have is available. I'm not sure what the terms of it are. Some interruptibles are very short term. I mean, you have to give them short notice, some you have to give them longer notice. But that's a very significant tool for managing your load. And I think back to previous efforts of Black Hills to make special tariffs available for customers like that. It's been kind of under the presumption that it wouldn't impact the other load that Black Hills has. So I kind of disagree with you about the impact of the demand side. And if you just let me go a little further, it's a strategy that has enormous possibilities in the future as homes become more, and businesses and things, you can have literally utility control of devices within the customer premise with their permission and getting compensated for that, that would shed load at the appropriate times. So, you know, if we just had a situation where our space heaters, our electric water heater and our air conditioning didn't run at the same time in our houses, for example, that would be an enormous, simple demand-side strategy that would lower the demands for the system in an incredible sense. And it's hard for me to think that the future is not in that direction. So I might push back on your demand side is not de minimis, I might say. I don't know. You're certainly welcome to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm probably over my skis a little bit on that piece of it. I will say that, yes, we do have an interruptible tariff that is based, to my knowledge, on the price of the energy that's available. If the price goes up, the customer may have the ability to say, you know, if it gets above this point, we'll shut down. We don't want to pay any more than that. So there is a possibility that is all market power that is purchased for those customers under the agreements laid forth in the tariff, and also in the legislation that Mr. Chairman helped with us on 2019. So I would probably agree with you, and you're much wiser than I am in a lot of these things, that there are some possibilities there. I think the point that my folks were trying to make is we're just not sure how that's going to work as it's laid out in the bill as far as demand side and supply side pieces of it. We can report on it, but without the ability to further those contracts, I think is what they were angling for. Because right now, we only have that blockchain interruptible tariff that I'm aware of, so.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. Any other questions, Senator Landon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just trying to catch up on an early morning here. So, Mr. Bush, that was a little bit alarming to me when you referenced, you know, a couple $1 million in the state south of here, you know, with respect to treating it like a contested case. Did I understand that correctly, that down there they've gone to a format where, you know, looking at the integrated resource plan is under a contested case model, and is that the cost driver? And if the answer to that question is yes, then would it suffice taking the paragraph out on page 2 that was suggested by the Public Service Commission? Would that ease that financial burden Can you talk a little, help me understand that piece a little bit better?
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman,
Bush.
I will do my best, Senator Landon, and there probably are others that have actually worked through cases in Colorado and know it a little bit more inside and out than I do. But yes, that's the information that I was given, was that it was about a $2 million cost to us to do our last IRP in Colorado because of the requirements of Colorado with the third-party evaluators and all the outside parties that do analysis, testimony, things of that nature. It increased the cost of that IRP significantly. It may, with the changes that the commission has asked for, if the committee grants them, that may also alleviate some of that. I mean, it almost seems to me that we're getting back to the point of where we are now with their ability to have an IRP that does have a little bit more of a hearing to it. So it's tough for me to answer that without having actually been in the Colorado process, but I know there's at least one individual I'm sure that can probably speak to that that's in the room, so.
Okay, thank you for that. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Anybody else? Thank you, gentlemen. We'll open up to more general public testimony. Mr. Nelson, did you want to address the committee on this one? Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. Thor Nelson on behalf of the Wyoming Industrial Energy Consumers. On behalf of WIAC, we encourage the committee to vote this bill forward. We think that it is good commission policy and something that should be enacted in Wyoming. In particular, the main issue that this bill tries to address is the fact that historically the commission has, as I'm sure you are all well aware, simply accepted for filing integrated resource plannings, and there has been some question at the commission over the years about whether or not they have the ability to do anything more than that. The Wyoming statutes clearly provide the commission the authority to set rates. They clearly provide the commission authority to review and approve the construction of new facilities. They do not clearly provide the authority to review long-term planning. And so that's the deficit that this bill is attempting to address, and critically, to put the commission on a level playing field and put Wyoming on a level playing field with the other states, in particular in the Pacific Core area, but in fairness, other multi-state utilities in Wyoming have the same issue. You want Wyoming to be on the same foot as Oregon, Utah, and as Colorado when the utility planning process is considered. Just real quickly to a couple of the things that have been discussed this morning, and I apologize, I missed the first part of the commission's presentation, but I just want to make one thing clear. Relative to subsection B, from WIAC's perspective, we would have no issue with striking the very end of subsection B where it says the rules shall, and then the subsequent subparagraphs 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But you don't, from our perspective, want to strike the first sentence of section B because that actually is the guts of the bill. If you look at it, subsection A simply requires that the commission require the utilities to make a filing. The first sentence of subsection B is what gives the commission the authority to do something with that filing other than accept it, which is to create a process for the review and acknowledgement of the action plan and the integrated resource plan. That's the guts of the bill. After that, where it says the rules shall, that's details, which I agree with the commission, that can be sorted out later and the commission is perfectly capable of dealing with that. But from WIAC's perspective, we would encourage the committee to be a little bit careful about deleting the entirety of B.
And Mr. Nelson, just to catch you up, the commission had sort of two levels of comments on this section. The first comment was to delete Romanet I, lines 13 through 15 on page 2. And then the discussion kind of evolved and they indicated a preference for deleting all of B.
Sure, and like I said, the Romanets are not mission critical because the rules can specify that. And so you could be more surgical if you wanted. If you want to be more prescriptive, that's fine as well. The critical piece though, like I said, is that first sentence before you get to the rules shall. And so with that, I will leave to the committee's discretion what to do with the Romanettes. But otherwise, I would just not remove the entirety of B, and unclear if that was the commission's intent or not.
And Mr. Nelson, you said the first sentence, so you don't think that the words "the rules shall" are essential in that part?
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
It's from, the rules shall can be deleted and all the Romanettes can be deleted or preserved at your preference if you feel like you want to direct how the commission does its rules. But otherwise, my expectation is if you left the commission to its discretion, the rules would do all of the things that are in the Romanettes. And so that's why, from WIAC's perspective, those aren't critical. I will just mention a couple of other pieces. So relative to the testimony you've heard already, I can tell you I'm involved in integrated resource planning in Colorado. I've been involved in litigated cases in Wyoming. The processes are very different, and I would not expect the process that you see in Colorado to come into Wyoming, certainly not to the same degree. But that isn't to say that these things aren't expensive. It is fair that there is cost incurred in this, but the whole point of the planning process is to incur a small amount of cost before, even in the low $1 million range, that can happen, before the billions of dollars of costs are spent in new facilities that may be contrary to state of Wyoming energy policy. And so it is an investment, and it is an investment in the future, but from WIAC's perspective, it's money well spent to make sure that Wyoming's energy policies are implemented in the way that are consistent with the state of Wyoming's approach to how we should be doing electricity. So those are my comments. Happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Questions for Mr. Nelson? I think we're good, sir. Thank you very much. Who else would
Thank
like
you.
to address the committee on this bill? Ms. Anderson, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Shannon.
Pull that up close if you don't mind.
Sure. Shannon Anderson on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council. We also support the bill. Mr. Chairman, we've been involved in integrating planning processes since 2011. Over that time period, we have supported bills from yourself and proposals from the industrial consumers to create a more rigorous process in Wyoming. And that's exactly what this bill does. It's time to pass it forward and create this process in our state. Essentially, it's parity with Utah. We actually have intervened in Utah proceedings before with like-minded groups in Utah because it is a more rigorous process down there, and it's helpful for us to be able to have data requests and to be able to have a process before the commission that is meaningful. Our process right now is not very meaningful for stakeholders. The process up to filing is meaningful with the utility itself, but once it's filed with the commission, we write comments, they write comments back, there's maybe a public comment hearing, and then there's no action taken on anything in the plan. And that's just not a meaningful process for people in our state. I would like to make just a couple of points to what you've heard earlier. Specifically on MDU, because I am an MDU customer, our office is an MDU customer. The integrated part of the MDU system means nothing for Wyoming. We're actually separated out as a system. So lately, MDU actually has started to file a resource plan specific to Wyoming, which has been much more helpful. So we would encourage them to continue to do that. And so merely filing what they file in the Dakotas and Montana means nothing for Wyoming. So that's why it's important to have a Wyoming process specific to Wyoming customers. And then also on the demand side issue, load increase is significant, Mr. Chairman, as you're aware. Data centers, crypto mining, blockchain, these are real issues facing utilities right now. And we encourage you to keep that demand side part in the bill.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
Happy to
Questions
answer
for
any
Ms.
questions.
Anderson? Ms. Anderson, you heard the discussion from the commission about kind of the two levels of amendments. First one being removing Romanet I, and then they suggested the second to remove the B part. And you heard the discussion with Mr. Nelson. How do you weigh in on all that?
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, we don't have anything else to add. I would agree with Mr. Nelson. I think it's fine to take all of that out, as provided there are still rules and rules will be done. We can weigh in that process at that time.
All right. Anything else, committee? Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you.
Who else would like to address the committee on this bill? Yes, sir, come on up. Senator Boner doesn't qualify for membership, but Landon and I won't declare a conflict. Go ahead.
That joke never gets old. Mr. Chairman, Sam Shumway, AARP Wyoming, thank you. Very briefly, we stand in support of this bill. As was mentioned earlier in testimony, there was a rate case earlier this summer with a dramatic disparity between what the utility was requesting as a rate increase and what was actually awarded by the Public Service Commission. This is problematic for our members. This creates concern, stress, some level of distrust in the system. To the extent that the Public Service Commission can be more involved in the integrated resource planning process, we believe that's a good thing, and potentially could avoid some of these, like I said, dramatic disparities in what's ultimately being asked for and what they're awarded by the Public Service Commission. And so for that reason, we support this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Shumway. Any questions for Mr. Shumway? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Who else would like to address the committee on this bill? Anybody else? Is there anybody online? Nobody online? Committee, you've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure? Motion by Landon. Oh, I'm sorry, Madam. Did you have something else you wish to add? Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things quickly.
Okay.
First of all, I agree with Mr. Nelson. I didn't mean to take out the guts of the bill with that comment.
Okay.
So,
Well, that's
Second of all-
significant.
second of all, I just want to clarify, because I think you want to have all the information. There could be a contested case, even if we have contested case procedures. So if somebody asked for a hearing on an integrated resource plan under this
New
if
bill.
it passes, we would have a contested case. But I think we can envision that that would probably maybe only happen in one or two instances. So I didn't want you to leave thinking there would never be a contested case under this. There could be, and I'm guessing that with our largest utility, there probably will be.
Fair
But
enough.
this is not the Colorado process, and I think Mr. Nelson explained that too.
Fair enough. Any further questions? Madam Chairwoman, has anyone ever requested a hearing on an integrated resource plan before?
No, and I don't,
It's a trick question, because I did.
you did, okay, that was,
I did.
but that was before my time,
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
So it goes back a couple of iterations, but then, and I believe the governor's office weighed in on the need to review subsequent to that.
And then you'll recall that we initiated an investigation.
Yes, you
on our
did.
own. And,
Third time's a charm.
right.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Anybody else? Any other thing on this bill? We have a motion by Landon, discussion by the committee. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to suggest an amendment, which would go in on line 11, page 2, and beginning with the rules shall. I would suggest that we strike that language all the way through page 3, line 10, ending in the word plan, period, thereby knocking out the rules shall and the Romanettes as suggested by a couple of folks this morning. I don't think we need it. I think that we can accomplish all that by rule, and we just learned about contested cases, and they can certainly take place that way, so that's my amendment.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Any discussion on the amendment? You good on that? Seems like everybody's good. All those in favor of the amendment as presented signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. So that's that amendment is carried. Back on the bill. Anything else on the bill? Question can be called on the bill. Just to telegraph you guys, this is an interim committee bill. Senator Barlow was here for most of the testimony this morning, or a significant amount. Senator Scott has heard the bill before. I intend to leave the vote open for Senator Scott, and if that's all right. Madam Chairwoman, were you trying to get something for the last? Deep breath, Madam Chairwoman. We have more. Pull it close, your heart.
We did request staff on this bill.
Oh, that's right. I was thinking it was the other bill.
Well, It was the other bill,
Yeah.
but we also requested staff on this bill.
So is it, what's the gist of the staff? Is it kind of similar to the amendment we proposed for the last bill? The one
Except in,
person, $200,000?
this one included an attorney. So it was a staff person and an attorney. 2 staff and an attorney. Excuse
Do I
me.
hear?
Sorry.
Mr. Burbridge, would you get the chairwoman some coffee this morning? Mr. Burbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On this particular bill, the fiscal note does request 2 staff. That, of course, is an estimate, but it's based on the investigation to a certain extent where when we did our investigation into the IRP, we actually had to go out and get a third-party consultant to assist us with that. And as I explained in the last bill with a staff request, or maybe I didn't explain this, these are cumulative, so we've looked at these proposed bills individually. And I'll just, now, because in the next bill, we've requested more. We do have room in our assessment for the staff that we are requesting, but it would require an appropriation.
So how much money would you request with 2 staff members?
In this bill, I believe it was right around $290,000 per year.
Okay, so if we made the amendment, 2 staff people and 300,000, would the commission be okay with that?
I believe that would cover what we were asking for very closely.
Okay, and of course, to come from the public utility assessment. Would there be heartburn, and anybody want to address the committee about that? Any member of the public, anybody online? Okay, so, committee, maybe we could have a motion to offer that amendment, and we could follow the structure of the amendment we offered on the previous bill that's on general file.
So, Mr. Chairman, is it your idea to fold the personnel piece in with the suggested amendment
Yeah.
that was on the floor? Okay. I would, that's a friendly amendment, so we could sure include that, or it could be separate, either one. I think,
Well, my preference would be that it be part of our standing committee amendments, so that we.
Perfect.
And then it'll get referred to appropriations now. And appropriations gonna have all these bills, they can jostle the staff and say, could this person do part of this job and that job, and things like that. So I would be searching for an amendment for staff and budget.
So moved.
Okay, so moved by Boner, and just to be clear, it's two staff members, then $300,000. And we'll follow the structure. When is this bill effective?
July 1st.
It's a July 1, so that ought to work. Would that be acceptable to the commission?
To make it effective immediately,
No, just
July.
July 1, but the fiscal amendment, 2 staffers and 300,000.
And Mr. Chairman, are you talking annually or for the biennium?
I think that's biannual. It's annual, okay.
Annual, okay. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So I got to be clear about that. I think it'd be more, 300,000 would cover a year, but it wouldn't cover 2 years, is what you're saying.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
What is the 2-year amount?
Mr. Chairman, it's
It's close to 700.
I'm looking, yeah, it looks like it's close to 700,000 with the associated costs besides salary. For office supplies and some rearrangement that would have to be done within our office to house the staff members. And that's for the biennium.
Understand. Senator Boner, would it be friendly to take your amendment and go to 600,000 for the biennium?
Yeah.
That's what we're gonna do. So the motion on the table is 2 staff members and $600,000 as a biennial appropriation. Any heartburn? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That is carried. Anything else on the bill? Anything else on the bill? Could we call roll on the bill, and we're going to Senator Scott is just walking in the door, so give him a chance to get his breath. And we'll just leave it open for a while. He doesn't have to. Senator Scott, we have a bill that we're just finishing up. It's the very first bill on our list, integrated resource plans. We're leaving it open for you and Senator Barlow to offer your vote. We accepted, there was pretty uniform agreement on a amendment to par the bill down slightly with respect to the detail of the rulemaking. And we added an appropriation of 2 staffers and $600,000 to be paid out of the Public Utility Fund.
I would vote aye on that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so you can go ahead and call the roll. If anybody thinks I misrepresented that to Senator Scott, you better say it now. Okay, thanks.
Senator Barlow,
He's excused. We'll leave it open for Senator Barlow.
Senator Boner,
Aye.
Senator Landon,
Aye.
Senator Scott,
Aye.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye. So the bill's obviously passed, but we will leave a chance for Senator Barlow to weigh in. And the next bill for our consideration is the one on, hold on. Senate File 25, Reclamation and Decommissioning Costs. Might as well start us off, Madam Chairwoman.
We did, I guess we've got some for remote testimony, but we did not miss anybody on that bill, so we're okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
we have a list of people that are participating remotely, but none on that past bill. And if something changes, just get my attention, you guys. Okay, thank you. Back to you, Madam Chairwoman. Senate File 25.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And apologies, I don't believe I was at the committee meeting when you adopted this as an interim bill. But it remains our position that this bill is not needed. Our existing processes do this. If we're looking at our largest utility, we already went through a decommissioning study for them that was paid for by the 6 states, the ratepayers in the 6 states. We had a docket on that. Nobody objected to the study. And as a result of that docket, we actually did increase rates to cover incremental decommissioning costs. So that study was an AACE Class 3 coal decommissioning cost estimate provided by Kiewit Group. The Kiewit studies were part of the commission-approved 2020 MSP. And it's likely that there will be an update to the Kiewit study, either as part of, and Mr. Burbridge will correct me if I get this wrong, either as part of the MSP process or as we get closer to an actual decommissioning. So decommissioning costs are already accounted for in 2 accounts. One is for incremental costs that tracks costs and adjustments due to interim plant retirements, and another account for the depreciation rate, costs that are recorded according to GAAP accounting. So these accounts are accounted for, they're never reduced, and also the cost of decommissioning does not really become completely accurate until you get closer to a retirement. And right now, we don't even have any retirements pending. I think the first retirements could be in 2027 with Dave Johnston 1 and 2. Naughton is currently planned to be converted to natural gas, but we don't have any pending applications for either of those. So essentially, our existing process covers decommissioning, and this would just be spending money that, in my opinion, does not need to be spent.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Questions for Madam Chairwoman? Any questions? Madam Chairwoman, I'm not seeing any questions, but I'll just venture to get it started maybe. So I think one of the reasons behind this bill is that we're worried that the settlement amounts for states that choose to get out of coal and want to remove them from having any rate impact with respect to coal, but yet, there's kind of a payoff, I guess it's over time, when we part company under the multi-state protocol with respect to these facilities that some states don't want to recognize in rates anymore. And so there is a compensation arrangement. And I think the impetus for part of this bill was that, and you just said it in your testimony, we don't really know the decommissioning costs till we get closer. And I think that's part of the impetus behind this bill, in that we're doing these settlements with these states, but yet down the road, we get to the point where costs are higher than they were expected. And is that a fair deal for the ratepayers of Wyoming when we've already kind of settled it? I think that's the backstory to this bill. Madam Chairwoman, did I get it right, Senator Scott? You go ahead.
Mr. Chairman.
You please have a microphone. They'll work on it for you, I think. And point it down towards you. Welcome. I know it was very late last night. I appreciate you being here.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, part of this, and this was in part drawn from the bill last year, we kept hearing from very reputable sources, Mr. Chairman, including some that are pretty senior in the current state government, that there were problems with particularly the Dave Johnson unit, dating from the earliest days of the Dave Johnson unit, when the standards for how you disposed of particularly fly ash, and coal fly ash can have all kinds of nasty things in it, but that the way it was done in the early days was not up to anywhere close to the current standard, and sooner or later there was going to be a major problem with groundwater contamination over it. And last year, had no ability to know whether or not that had really been effectively dealt with. And this bill is designed to nail that down so we don't have an ambush that hits the Wyoming ratepayer later on in the decommissioning.
Thank you, sir.
And that was in good part the motivation. What you said about the possibility of the states that are trying to abandon coal and trying to buy their way out of their long-term obligations on the cleanup, I think is entirely accurate, Mr. Chairman, and that's a motivation as well. But we were hearing just persistent reports from people who were in a position to know that there was trouble there. And we were trying to nail that down as to whether there was or wasn't.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Back to you, Madam Chairwoman.
Mr. Chairman, again, Kiewit did a study of all three plants and came in with pretty high costs, which is why we imposed additional rates to begin collecting for those decommissioning costs. We have not been presented with evidence in an evidentiary proceeding that those decommissioning studies, which again were the AACE Class 3 studies, were incomplete.
Senator Landon.
So, Madam Chairman, I really appreciate your comments. I'm trying to get there with this notion. So we're going to give you a $500,000 study. Is there a chance that study is going to tell you anything that you don't know already?
Madam Chairwoman.
A chance, yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon. I suppose there's always a chance because, new studies sometimes do things differently, even if they're following the same protocols. there's always a judgment in anybody's study. So you change who does the study, you might get a different judgment. But in terms of telling us anything more than we need to know at this point, I don't believe so.
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman, I
Chair- or
apologize.
Mr.
I didn't
Lemon.
ask that question very well, and appreciated you picking up the slack there, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else? Anything else from the commission? Mr. Burbridge.
Mr. Chairman, John Burbridge. I guess I wanted to clarify that the Kiewit studies that were done were a product of the MSP, and those were specifically asked for in recognition of the danger of other states exiting early from these coal-fired facilities, and that the money accounted for depreciation purposes was not going to be adequate. And so the MSP group authorized the Kiewit study, which was more in depth than what had been done previously, in order to close that gap, so that states that wanted to exit the plants early would be paying their fair share. And as we sit today, the closure dates have changed, because what was anticipated would be closure dates for at least some of the states based on Oregon legislation to get out of coal, have changed, because most of those units now are being converted to gas, and there's no provision in Oregon law that we're aware of that restricts gas-fired plants from Oregon being able to utilize electrons from gas-fired generation plants. And to address Senator Landon's question about would those studies be different today, I anticipate that they would be. These studies are now old enough that with the current state of the economy and inflation, it would surprise me if it wasn't different. And that's the point of what we're doing here, and what we do traditionally with the decommissioning studies is that as you get closer to a closure date, you get more granular studies and you have more accurate numbers at what certain things would cost. And we go through that exercise with the applications filed by the companies. I do have a fear of an unintended consequence that if we reduce these decommissioning studies, additional studies, to legislation, it may be treated as a situs cost, and then that would not be spread across the 6 states, but could be borne by Wyoming ratepayers alone. And that would be significant. And then lastly, I would note, we do have an appropriation on this. There is a general fund appropriation of $500,000 to help the commission review, I think this is how this works, if I remember correctly, the money that we have on hand, and we could hire a third party to help us with that, or what have you. And then we have asked for an appropriation out of the commission's assessment for 2 analysts and an attorney, because it does require us to go back through all qualifying units, and that would be with all regulated utilities that we have, and do studies as to, what's been collected. And so it goes beyond just what everybody's thinking about with Rocky Mountain Power. I don't really know what effect that would have on the other regulated utilities that generate their power. And lastly, I would note that this legislation does not affect the generation and transmission, such as a basin or a tri-state, and it doesn't reach the non-regulated generation that may be occurring in this state. So I stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burbridge. Senator Scott, let's get his microphone on. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, does the Kiewit study that you are relying on so far, does that deal specifically with the disposal of the fly ash in the early days of the Dave Johnson power plant, specifically related to particularly units 1 and 2, back in the days when we didn't understand nearly as well as we do now some of the risks involved in that process?
Mr. Burbridge.
Thank you, Chairman Case. Senator Scott, I will, to be honest, I'm not confident that I can answer in that granular of detail, but I do have some thoughts that perhaps the fly ash ponds might be regulated by the DEQ. And I don't remember if Kiewit looked at those specifically, but I think it did. And there are some people in this room that may be able to answer that question more directly than I'm able to remember right now.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, the reason I ask is that was the specific rumor we kept persistently hearing. There was problems in that area.
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Chairwoman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, the Kiewit study looked at all costs of decommissioning. I would have to go back and look to see specifically what was said about
The fly ash.
the fly ash.
Yeah.
But it was intended to cover, and the fly ash is huge at all facilities. It's a huge cost that's driving the closure of some coal-fired power plants as much as the air quality regulations are. So I'm reasonably confident that it was considered, but I'd have to go back and look at the study. And there are DEQ people here who
Right. Waiting patiently.
waiting patiently. And Mr. Chairman, if I could just follow up, it might have
course.
sounded like Mr. Burbridge said something different than I did, but I think we were saying the same thing in different ways, and that is, we have a process in place to deal with decommissioning, and adding this additional layer, I think, to do a study now, when maybe it's not the right time for a study, and I don't think it gets us any more than what our existing process does.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Any other questions? I might have one question. I'm unclear, and maybe I shouldn't, but under the MSP and the previous studies and the previous agreements, as states go forward with different policies, and your point about conversion to gas involves some of those decisions right now. But if we convert to gas, for example, this is hypothetical, but maybe not, the other states, the trigger about it being a coal plant doesn't occur under the MSP. It continues to be a system resource as we go forward. And we know that costs in the future are higher. Do the reclamation obligations arising from the coal era of that plant, are they capped under the MSP for the non-coal people, or are we allowed to revisit that down the road? Because if there was a revisit about the coal issues and all the participants who were part of that, we probably wouldn't even need this bill. I'm just asking. So, you understand the question, and is there a fallacy to it? Mr. Burbridge.
Chairman Case, I honestly don't know the answer to that question as I sit here.
Okay. I love answers like that, actually.
Mr. Chairman,
Madam Chairwoman.
so we just approved the extension of the 2020 MSP because all of these issues are still not resolved in the process, so.
Can I ask a variety of that same question? The variety is, if a plant continues to operate as a coal plant, not converted to gas, that is a different arrangement within the MSP. And then states are looking towards, the fair compensation is the liabilities that occurred up to the point when they no longer wanted to participate in the system allocation of that resource. Again, does that cap their obligation? And how do we know that the capped obligations don't grow over time? The buried unknowns. Back to you.
You want me to- Well, Mr. Chairman, I hope that would not happen, because those states have benefited. I think the goal of the MSP, and to be clear, commissioners don't participate, as you know, in the negotiation of the terms. And there are people in the room who do. And so I have to be careful what I say, and they may have better information, so I'll be brief. But the goal of the MSP is, everybody pays their fair share. And the states that have benefited from coal-fired plants, for 95% of their lives, of the unit's operating lives, should pay for those costs. So they shouldn't be able to walk away from the cost in year 41 of a plant because they didn't use it in year 41, but they used it for 40 years. So I hope so things should not be capped. They should adjust for inflation, but that's not done yet. So
Okay.
ideally, we shouldn't be stuck with costs that other states should pay.
Senator Scott, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Let's get his mic on.
Different question. Has either the Public Service Commission or, to your knowledge, any other agency of the state government ever had a public hearing particularly in Converse County, where ordinary citizens who can't afford a lawyer could come and testify and tell you about potential problems?
Madam Chairwoman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, no, we didn't, with the Kiewit study, which was a separate decommissioning docket, we did not have a public comment hearing in Converse County or anywhere because there wasn't, sufficient interest.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else for the commission? Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Mr. Parfit, would you like to give an agency perspective? We'll get the OCA after the DEQ if that's all right. I didn't see you in the corner. I apologize. Welcome, Mr. Parfit. You don't come here very often.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, our role in this particular bill is one of us.
You might point that microphone better at you.
Sorry.
That.
Is that better?
Let's see.
How's that?
Good.
All right. So the DEQ's role in this bill would be one to be supportive of the Public Service Commission. So just a couple of things. As far as the Kiewit study, there's been a lot of discussion around the Kiewit study. We have not reviewed that Kiewit study to date. I don't think we've seen that. But the study itself that we're talking about here would be to determine the reclamation and decommissioning obligations at the facility and also to identify needs for reclamation and decommissioning of the facility. So that's the purpose of the study. We do have permits at all of these facilities for the management of coal combustion residuals, either through impoundments or through landfills. Those would be industrial landfills for the fly ash. As far as historical that we don't know about, well, I guess we don't know what we don't know, right? But that's something that as we go through the process, working through with the Public Service Commission, then we could identify potentially any of those unpermitted units that may have been used in the past. But I would like to also maybe speak a little bit about the coal combustion residuals process, and we are currently seeking primacy for that program. Right now, that's regulated by EPA under the current regulatory structure, and so I might turn it over to, if I could, to the Administrator of the Solid and Hazardous Waste Division, Suzanne Engels.
Say your last name again and welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Suzanne Ingalls.
Ingalls, okay. Thank you, Ms. Ingalls.
Thank you.
Welcome.
As Director Parfit mentioned, my division, the Solid and Hazardous Waste Division, is in the process of obtaining primacy for implementing the coal combustion residual program at DEQ. We've submitted our primacy application to EPA in 2023, early 2023, and we're working through the process with them. As a state, we've incorporated by reference all of the federal standards so that all of the facilities in Wyoming are required to meet those federal standards and obtain an operating permit from the agency. However, if one of these units, the impoundment or a landfill is closing, they are also required to obtain a closure permit from us. We have done significant outreach with the regulated utilities. We've provided opportunity for public comment during our rulemaking process. And I believe our rules became in effect in 2022 that are equivalent to the federal standards. Prior to adopting those rules, the Solid and Hazardous Waste Division had rules in place to regulate the landfills under our industrial landfill regulations, as well as our Water Quality Division had rules in place to regulate the surface impoundments.
Okay. Questions for Ms. Ingalls? Senator Scott, we'll start with you.
Mr. Chairman.
Microphone for Senator Scott. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, my question is, when was the Department of Environmental Quality created? It was early 70s, wasn't it? Or was it? And who regulated disposal of the fly ash, if anybody, in the period before the creation of DEQ?
Probably before Ms. Ingalls was born, I would guess. And Mr. Parfit, I'm not sure about you, but if you can answer.
I'm not sure about me either. So, Mr. Chairman, 1973 was the creation of the Environmental Quality Act and the agency. How fly ash was handled prior to 1973, I don't have an answer for you for that.
And the plant that we're talking about started in what decade, basically? Do we know? Do you remember, Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, it was, I believe, the very late 1950s.
1950s.
And it was the first, as I remember, other than a small one up in Gillette. Because I can remember as a teenager going to a presentation by John Woe of Casper on what a big deal the Powder River Basin was going to be, Mr. Chairman. And that was a very profitable experience for us.
Yeah, thank you very much. So it ran at least 15 years, probably not using Powder River coal at that time.
Oh, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
It was using Powder River coal. They had a mine about 15, 20 miles north of the power plant. That's why they built the power plant where they did.
Makes sense, makes sense.
And they used that well, to what, about a dozen years ago, they ran through it. And it was Powder River coal, and I think the quality of the coal in terms of BTUs was a little higher in the southern end of the basin than it is in the northern end.
Understand. Thank you. Who else had questions for the Senator Landon?
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Director and Mr. Ingalls, appreciate you both being here. Would it be worth the investment to undergo the kind of review that this bill suggests? Is there an opportunity, do you think, to benefit your operation? Is there a chance we're going to find something that we don't know already?
I'd like to address Mr. Parfit.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, there's always the chance that you might find something that you were unaware of. That's why we have the Orphan Site Program. And in that Orphan Site Program, we identify sites throughout the state where there's no responsible party. And then the state actually takes on the liability for cleaning that up. And then if we do come across a responsible party, then we would pursue a recovery of those costs.
Back to you.
So if this was in your budget, would you spend $500,000 on a study right now?
Mr. Parfit.
Mr. Chairman, this is a little bit different than the programs that we typically are involved with. So for, say, mining or, well, particularly with the mining, we do bonding, and we do that on an annual basis. That's re-upped and recalculated every year and adjusted accordingly. This is a little bit different than what we typically are involved with. But it's worth noting that we are specifically prohibited from, not say prohibited, but the utilities are exempt from bonding or financial assurance requirements with the DEQ for this type of activity.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I got a question. If we were to modify this bill and ask you to examine in-house the Kiewit study, would combine that with what you know about the properties of coal fly ash and that sort of thing, and see if they had dealt adequately with the issues of disposal in those early days of the plant. You know, frankly, I have, Mr. Chairman, great confidence in the DEQ and how they've regulated it in recent years. You know, I think they've probably done a very competent job, and we've learned a lot as to what needs to be done. It's the early years that make me nervous that there's an unfunded liability here, Mr. Chairman. If we were to modify the bill to actually have you take an in-house look at the Kiewit study, would that be something that you could do a reasonable job of and say, did they cover it or did they not cover it? And do we need to examine things further?
Mr. Parfit.
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, having not seen the Kiewit study, it's a little difficult to answer that question, but we could certainly take a look at that. Right now, the way this bill is structured is that we think appropriately, we would be a support role to the Public Service Commission. Whether or not that Kiewit study would provide you what you're looking for, which is something that we don't know about, and how they manage that, whether or not that Kiewit study even addresses that, I'm not sure. It seems like you would need to do a phase 1 and a phase 2 assessment to really understand if there's anything to be concerned about.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Anybody else for the Department of Environmental Quality? Anything else? Thanks for coming. Mr. Anellis, please. I'm sorry I missed you earlier. How's the Office of OCA today?
Doing well after a holiday weekend, so thank you, Chairman, and no apologies needed. I will be brief. Mainly, I wanted to make myself available for questions regarding some of your MSP discussions you had with the Chairman and Mr. Burbridge. I would state from the outset, though, I do agree with Chairman Throne, as though we do have a fairly rigorous process in place through the MSP, and I think a lot of this would be simply duplicated in this particular bill. So, as I said, I would be happy to address any MSP questions, which is why I wanted to raise my hand for you there, Chairman.
You bet. Any questions for the consumer advocate? Any questions? I think you're off the hook easy today.
Easy enough, then. Thank you very much.
All right, let's go to utilities. You guys have any comments on this bill? Mr. Kaysen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Once again, Rick Kaysen with Rocky Mountain Power. The company agrees that the Public Service Commission already has the authority. If it's county rules, they have the ability to audit accounts. And as indicated earlier, the company has conducted studies on its units. And I'm going to comment on that in just a little bit more detail in a minute. I would like to remind the committee that federal laws do exist with regards to, with rules and regulations. They're already in place, and they have been for quite a while. Agencies like Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the Environmental Protection Agencies, They too have rules and regulations, requirements for the accounting when we're thinking about decommissioning, costs, and reclamation as well. And I know how much we like federal government edicts, but again, I repeat myself, these requirements already exist and we've been following those over the years. The studies for decommissioning, and I'm going to get to the Kiewit studies here in just a little bit, they are in depth, they do come at a cost, there's no doubt about that. And I'm sorry that no, I'm not going to be sorry, I need to repeat myself as we have to think about what that potential cost is for additional studies to the Wyoming customer. And when utilities like Rocky Mountain Power have already done and will do, get to will do in a little bit, these studies that tell us about what the conditions are at the various plants and units. With respect to what has been done and what will be done, I would like to share with you that the company did its decommissioning cost estimates along with its depreciation studies to update the depreciation rates, and this was about 5 years ago. And that's kind of like on schedule, if I may characterize it that way. We did file the depreciation study that included the decommissioning analyses in a docket, and that was finalized in the year 2020, so four years ago. We do plan and expect to do another depreciation study, again in concert with decommissioning costs, and that'll be done next year in 2025. So about every 5 years, we look at this. We have, as indicated by the Public Service Commission this morning, those studies were filed, they were docketed, they were reviewed, and there was an entire docket about the Kiewit decommissioning studies as well that was filed with the commission. And that was also part of the 2020 rate case at that particular point in time. As noted earlier today, part of the MSP or multi-state protocol process as well. So these studies have been done. They have been filed with the commission. They have gone through the regulatory process in hearings. And we plan to do another study in 2025. It was shared earlier in the interim that this bill potentially is not needed. There are already safeguards already built into it. And so again, what is this bill? As Senator Scott identified, he's looking out into the future, and we acknowledge that. With respect to Senator Scott's questions regarding the fly ash, the groundwater issues and what have you, I will go back and I'll find out if the Kiewit studies, again, did any analysis on these two issues, and I will also ask my employer to consider this for the 2025 study as well. So those are in the making. Those are, again, be costs that will be borne by the company and potentially by the end of the day, the ratepayers and what have you. So timing is going to be very important about when our company does the study and when this bill might have a study in place as well. So I'd ask the committee to seriously think about allowing our company to do its study, which it's obligated and wants to do because it needs to know its position, and perhaps we can defray any costs in any other legislative activities needed with what this bill is intended to try to accomplish. With that, Mr. Vice Chairman, I'll try to answer questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. Appreciate it. Any questions for Rocky Mountain Power? Any questions? Go ahead, Senator Scott. If we could get a microphone. There we go.
Mr. Chairman, and I'm thinking back, you mentioned the federal regulators that occurred before we had our own DEQ. EPA was formed, I want to say late 1971, early 1972, and my memory, Mr. Chairman, not perfect. Became an employee of the agency about 3 or 4 months after it was formed, but concentrated in the water quality area, where we were dealing largely with municipal and some significant industrial discharges. And Mr. Chairman, in the early days of EPA, it was a mess because it consolidated a bunch of agencies, some of which had been reorganized. Some of them in this area, I think, were reorganized 5 times in 4 years before EPA was formed. And the resulting was that the federal regulation in those days was not very great. So I don't know how much you know, I'll ask you how much you know about what the federal regulation that Dave Johnson had in the days before EPA and DEQ.
So I'll certainly let you answer the good senator, Mr. Casey, and then we're going to try to move on. We've got a list of about 15 bills to get to today, and so please carry on.
Okay. Mr. Vice Chair, from Senator Scott, I do not know. Okay. In 1972, I was just beginning my career in the utility business, and I didn't even know what EPA stood for. So I do not know but I am going to make the somewhat accurate assumption that things have drastically changed since the early 1970s and vaulted to the early 2020s.
Mr. Casey, you indicated that you would work with your troops to make sure that in 25, when that study's conducted, I'm sure you'll be sharing all of the conversations that we've had, and appreciate that. So thank you. Yes, sir. Let's go to further testimony. Anything else, Mr. Casey? Thank you. Any further testimony? We are on Senate File 25. Please come forward. Welcome back to the microphone. Pull it up close.
Okay.
This is a tough room to hear in. Please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Appreciate it. Shannon Anderson on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council. So as a conservation organization, we're very in tune to this issue of fly ash. And of course, we also operate in the utility space as well. And we would agree with the sentiment from the Utility Commission that this bill really is not needed. And it's not needed for a few reasons. I mean, one is, of course, there's already that process that the utilities have to evaluate decommissioning costs. It's also not needed from an environmental perspective because, again, these facilities are now under permit. And there's been extensive groundwater monitoring at all of these locations. There has been a history of groundwater contamination at Dave Johnson, at Naughton, at Jim Bridger. That is 100% true. But what the monitoring has shown is that, there's maybe not a threat to drinking water resources or other, again, there's site assessments, extensive groundwater monitoring. That has all kind of been happening. And in fact, the results of those studies are posted publicly on the Berkshire Hathaway website. And so if you need to see the groundwater monitoring results at any of these facilities, are actually very publicly available. That was part of the EPA's coal ash rule, was to have additional public transparency and disclosure about groundwater monitoring at these facilities. I would note, again, that the decommissioning costs and what state pays for what are very much under negotiation in the multi-state protocol process. So as a party to the MSP, I can't really share exactly what those negotiations have been. I would just emphasize with you that they are very much present in those negotiations, that conversation of who pays for what when. How do we make sure that as Oregon exits coal units, as coal units transition to natural gas or even nuclear, that we address the coal ash and the other pieces of the coal facility that will be decommissioned in that transition. So those conversations are ongoing, those negotiations are happening, and we'll see what the results are fairly shortly on that. So I would just note again that there is groundwater monitoring, there's permitting for these facilities. with perhaps the exemption of Wyodak, which actually doesn't have federal oversight, and that's partly because the coal ash is disposed in the mine. And so the Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement has yet to actually implement rules that parity the EPA on coal ash. But for the facilities that we've been talking about today, Dave Johnson, Knott, and Jim Bridger, again, there is federal oversight. There's processes from the DEQ, and we believe our environmental regulators and our utility commission regulators should be focused elsewhere. And this bill just gives them more busy work that actually isn't going to help consumers or the environment.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Any questions for the Public Powder River Basin Resource Council? Ms. Anderson? Any question? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Let's continue, and I'm going to turn it back to the good chairman, but take it away.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Johnson?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Tammy Johnson. I'm the Executive Director for Wyoming AFL-CIO.
You might pull the mic a
Sorry,
little bit closer.
closer. The directions say, well, never mind. So, yeah, it is better. So you should have before you an amendment that I submitted a couple of days ago at the last committee meeting. It's a very short amendment, and I won't try to repeat it for you. You guys can read it. I trust your English teachers did their job. So I'm really concerned when we talk about decommissioning and reclamation of facilities that we don't take into any consideration the cost to the community, the cost of jobs that are lost when this happens. Earlier today, I heard you guys discussing the conversion to natural gas, and that's actually happening at Jim Bridger as we speak. The plant, burner 1 is switching over to natural gas now. And the impact that that has had on the jobs there is not that, that the workers have lost jobs, it's that in anticipation of this, over the last few years, the company has not replaced workers. And so that puts the burden on the current workers to work extra long hours, extra long days, because they're not replacing any workers. My colleagues that work there are, I can hardly speak to them because they're working so many hours. And so so when those jobs go away in these communities, these are very good paying jobs. We're talking about $100,000 a year jobs that are gone when these coal-fired utilities decommission or switch over to natural gas, those kinds of things. And there's no structure right now to account for that cost to the community and to the economic impact of the loss of those jobs. I know that the governor's office has commissioned studies at UW to talk about in the past what some of these job loss things will cost a community and cost the state. But and I don't know that this is the PSC's role, but somewhere in this conversation about decommissioning, we have to have some accountability for the loss of jobs. These people move to these communities to support the utility and take the jobs, and then when the curtains start to come down, there's nothing in place to account for them or to help them or to let the community slowly adjust. As you know, you may know that when the U.S. Department of Energy began the Camera project, part of that requirement was that a community benefits assessment is done by TerraPower and the owner of the project. Well, I would like to submit to you that maybe these coal-fired utilities that are turning off, going away, decommissioning, maybe they should have to do a community harms assessment where they talk about and they figure out what the harm is going to be to the community. So, and that needs to be an honest, binding statement that they make, because there is significant harm to these communities. And we all can see the train coming down the tracks, but why do we wait quietly and watch these communities just get dismantled when the coal-fired plant shuts down? I'm happy to hear that Naughton's going to go to natural gas. That was something new to me, but that will save a lot of jobs in that community. But I don't know that we have those kinds of, we don't have a plan in place. And I worry a great deal. I know we don't want coal to go away. I don't either, because we have significant economic impact from that for workers and their families. These communities will really struggle. But we know it's coming, and so why don't we require the utility to make a plan that they submit to, whether it's the Public Service Commission, whether it's statutory, I don't know, but I would like to see somebody represent and speak up for the workers who are losing their jobs when these things happen. I know we're talking about the rates today, and that's important, but if the workers aren't there, the rates aren't gonna get paid, and they're probably gonna go up if we have fewer people paying, so. That's just some thoughts. I'm happy to answer questions about the amendment. It's very short. I just thought I'd share those thoughts with you today.
Questions for Ms. Johnson at this point? Ms. Johnson, would you go over your amendment?
I don't have it in front of me. I gave you guys all my copies. But,
Not sure that they made them here. Do we have, anybody have one?
yeah, they should.
Ms. Sharp has one she can
Oh,
share
she'll
with you.
share with me. Thank you. I apologize. I had two, I'm missing my copy this morning. So, after, on page 2, line
Everybody,
16.
she's gonna read it, so go ahead.
Oh, on page 2. What?
Back to you,
do I
Ms.
go?
Johnson. I was just getting
Sorry,
everybody's
Mr. Chairman.
attention over on this side. You're good.
I'm good, okay.
Page 2.
Page 2, line 16, after the word costs, insert, the Public Utilities Integrated Resource Plan will also include the costs and economic impact associated with the loss of jobs caused by the closure. I'm not really an amendment writer, but that kind of captures the essence of what I'd like to see.
Okay, thank you.
It's been done before, it can be done. It's just a step.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Questions for Ms. Johnson on a proposed amendment? Any questions? I think you're off the hook,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Johnson. Thank you
Off
very
the
much.
hook.
Who else would like to address the committee? Mr. Nelson?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members again. Thor Nelson on behalf of the Wyoming Industrial Energy Consumers. When we started this morning, WIAC was neutral on this bill. And that was frankly solely because the bill was drafted to have the general fund pay for it. To the extent the committee entertains the commission's request to add additional funding from the utility fund to pay for this, we would oppose this bill. Frankly, for all the reasons you've heard already, which is from our perspective, this bill is unnecessary. So a couple of details about that I just want to add. I will be brief. First, to the extent the concern of the committee is, do we have enough costs allocated to Oregon and Washington? This bill cannot change that. Importantly, the 2020 Multi-State Protocol Agreement locked in the obligations of Oregon and Washington to the levels set under the Kiewit study. That's already been done. And that was done because those states put into effect at that time a ramp of payments through 2029 that was intended to fully pay off their investment in those plants.
According to the study.
Right. And so under the agreement that the commission has approved and the parties have agreed, if a new study comes out, that cannot increase the obligation of the ratepayers in Oregon and Washington to pay any more. Secondly, we thought about that. There is a process in place in the event actual decommissioning costs exceed the levels set in the Kiewit study. And the way the process works is if actual costs are higher, the costs that would otherwise have been allocated to Oregon and Washington are paid for by the utility. Now, there is a process where the utility can ask customers in Wyoming, Utah, and Idaho, assuming those states stay in the plant, to cover those costs. But all they can do is ask. There's no obligation on anybody else's part to pay for it. The utility understands and is assuming the risk that the actual costs exceed the costs that were already allocated and set, and that's clearly set forth in the agreement. So without the agreement of the Wyoming Commission, any costs that are higher that would have been allocated to those other states cannot be paid or borne by Wyoming ratepayers. So that's the allocation question. Secondly, to the extent the purpose of this bill is to get sort of a more accurate assessment of where decommissioning costs are, there's two things that are important. First, the way the MSP did its decommissioning cost study, there was a tranche of power plants that were studied already in 2020. There is another tranche of power plants, specifically Craig, Hunter, Huntington, and Wyodak, whose decommissioning costs are being analyzed as we speak. And under the agreement, PacifiCorp is required to file a decommissioning study in June of this year. And so that's a proceeding that WIAC will actively engage in, as we did with the Kiewit study. And we had experts review and analyze the Kiewit study and concluded, based on everything we knew at the time, it was as good a thing as we could have seen. One of the things that we will be doing with the new studies that get filed in June is taking a look at whether or not any updates in the way that environmental regulations or other things apply will sort of call into question, if you would, what the Kiewit study did in 2020 for the other Wyoming power plants. And so that process will inform the accuracy of those studies. And then, as Mr. Kaysen already testified, every 5 years, PacifiCorp refiles a new depreciation plan and updates its decommissioning studies. And so that's already in place. I expect that next one will occur in 2025. And so there'll be then yet another round of analyses that we will engage in and participate in to make sure that the actual costs are being tracked and reflected. Again, that won't impact the allocation question because that's already set by agreement based on those earlier studies, but that will help inform Wyoming, Utah, and Idaho rates going forward to make sure that there are adequate monies available for the decommissioning of those plants if and when that ever is to come to pass. So for all those reasons, we don't think it's worth spending the money. And to be blunt, if you want to spend somebody else's money, that's up to you, but please don't spend our money. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nelson. Questions for Mr. Nelson? Any questions for Mr. Nelson? You're good. I think you're off the hook.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Who else would like to address the committee? Who else in this room would like to address the committee? Not seeing anybody. Is there anybody online that would like to address? There's nobody online. So I think we've exhausted the testimony. Committee, you've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure? Searching for a motion? Searching for a motion? Not getting. Senator Scott.
I think we have several ways.
Wait, green is good. There you go. Now go.
I think we have several ways we can proceed here.
Are you moving the bill?
I'm going to discuss with.
Okay, let's discuss it first. It's okay. Go ahead.
We can move the bill as is, proceed with the study. We can decide that what we really need to do is just have the DEQ take a look at the Kiewit study so that we have some objective third party look at it and see if there's a deficiency there that we need to pursue. We can, if we rely on what we just heard from Mr. Nelson, we can say, well, it's covered, the utility will get stuck with it. I don't know whether that's accurate or not. That would be probably lead to a do nothing recommendation, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little afraid that one way or another, they'll try to stick the ratepayers with any additional costs. And this, you know, it's a chronic problem, Mr. Chairman, with these large industrial facilities of what do you do with costs that were incurred because in the early days, the standards were just not what they are now. And if Mr. Nelson is accurate, this may be solved for this thing, but does preclude the use of the power plant probably by any other third party. May not, depending on how skillful they are at ducking liabilities that are previously incurred when they structure their deals. Mr. Chairman.
Or whether this legislature provides assistance
Yeah.
to the new owner to relieve them of
Yeah.
liability with respect to previous owners. Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'm not satisfied with what I've heard about what's been done before. I think everybody's inclination has been, oh, there's a study that didn't tell us anything was a problem. Let's bury it. I think that may come home to roost in the future, Mr. Chairman. I'm also not persuaded we need to do what the bill requires. And given the shortness of this session, I don't know that we can successfully rewrite the bill in the few days we've got before they close the general file in the Senate.
Fair enough. Mr. Parfit, can I ask you a question? So would it be correct to say that the department didn't have anything to do with the earlier study, the Kiewitz study that's referred to? You never saw it, you never.
That's
I don't
correct.
know. That's correct, right?
That's correct.
And while you're here, what would, and you haven't even seen it, so that you can't, this is purely speculative, but supposing you could take a look at that study and give some comments on it. There's probably a superficial look, and then there's very, very in-depth look, and there's a wide continuum there. What do you think about that? Is that so? Would the superficial look require a lot of effort? And I'm wondering if we could prevail for the department to just pull it off the shelf, look at it and say, gee, to really analyze and check this out, this is what this would take. It would take a couple of months of someone working, for example. And could you provide that estimate to us? And then maybe during the interim, we might think about that a little bit more. Or it's conceivable we could put some resources in the budget to help you to look at that. Committee, I'm just reaching here, but the thinking would be that we need to get more input from the Department of Environmental Quality, that nothing we can do in this bill really affects that. And I throw that out to you, Mr. Parfit. What's your reaction?
So, Mr. Chairman, first off, I would want to have a clear understanding of what our objective is for taking a look at the report.
Fair enough.
And then if we were going to pursue that, looking at a high level, just taking a look at the report, knowing the objectives, then I could give you a better answer as to what kind of resources we might need. But for doing the quick look at the report and a quick overview, I don't think we would need additional resources for that.
That's certainly fair. And I don't mean to speak for the committee, but I'll toss something out. The objective of your review would be to try to detect if there were major gaps in the cost and underestimation of costs as provided by the Kiewitz report. Would that be fair, Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman.
Let's get your microphone on.
Mr. Chairman, if we were to move the bill out of here, Mr. Chairman, I think between now and when it would be likely to be heard upstairs, I could substantially rewrite it to request the DEQ take that kind of high-level look that would inform, do we need to do anything further? So with that, Mr. Chairman.
Well, wait, let's get a reaction to that first. We've kind of been running informally first. I'm not sure that I want to rewrite this bill into something different and have a lot of people argue about it. But I am definitely would like to hear what the Department of Environmental Quality has to say. And if they needed extra resources, we could possibly come up with a budget amendment to do that. I don't know, it's crazy, but we could. If we just wanted to wait and get some input from them during the course of the interim, we could do that and then play it up in the interim. I'm not sure that I personally want to rewrite this bill and try to move it forward if it really has all these weaknesses that have been identified. I throw that out. Thoughts?
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm leaning the same direction as you on that. If we remain concerned about the early days of some of these plants, I would look forward maybe during an interim to having a good discussion with Director Parp and his crew to say, what can we do? What should we do? Maybe take an in-depth look, but if we're going to try to do that on the fly in a budget session, I would be really reluctant on that front, and I would certainly be reluctant on a budget amendment when we can't really, I don't think we can adequately express to the body what we're needing and what we're up to, because we haven't been able to visit with the department to get their ideas of what it would even take. So that's where I am.
Gotcha. Anybody else want to weigh in? So, at least for the moment, I'm not hearing a motion on the bill. Senator Scott, you can certainly make one if you wish. Searching for a motion, not,
Chairman.
Senator Scott.
I will move the bill.
Okay,
And, Mr. Chairman, I will subsequently move that we delete the appropriation.
okay, that's a motion, an amendment on the table. Discussion on the amendment?
And, Mr. Chairman, that's found on page 5 and 6 of the bill. It's section C, and it would involve page 5, line 15 through page 6, line 4, delete.
Okay, and Senator Scott, just by way of discussion, what would that do to the bill? I mean, obviously, the commission would have no resources, the department
Would have no resources, and to make the bill make sense, I would then have to go back and trim the bill way back down.
Okay.
Which I don't propose to do here, but it would keep it from going up the Works and Appropriations Committee.
So we have an amendment on the table about removing the appropriation. Is there any further discussion on that? Call for the question. All those in favor of removing the appropriation signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I'll go an aye. At least heard 3 ayes. Any opposed? Back on the bill. Senator Scott, you're not prepared to offer any more amendments?
Amendments today, and this is the last day, so we gotta vote it up or vote it down.
Okay. So I guess, Senator Scott, you'd like the committee to support moving the bill out so that you have a chance to make some amendment. That's kind of a big ask of the committee. You're certainly, we've served with you for a long time. We know the quality of your work, and it'll be excellent. So I'm prepared to give you the benefit of the doubt, but it also might put us in a tenuous place on getting it on the general file, and, you know, it might have a little less strength going upstairs. And I might weigh into that when we get upstairs.
I would not take offense with you.
Okay. So, well, the proposal is to go ahead and pass the bill out. Senator Scott's gonna do some black magic on it, shake his rattle and dance around the fire. I'm so sorry. I couldn't resist.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, frankly,
Senator Scott.
what I would do would be to reduce it to a couple paragraphs and have the DEQ take a high-level look at the studies that have been done to see if there's more needed.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion? All those, that would be a roll call on the bill.
Senator Barlow?
No.
Senator Boner?
Aye.
Senator Landon?
No.
Senator Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman?
I'm doing the math here. I'll do an aye. I kind of want to watch him in the big hat dancing around the fire, shaking the rattle. Okay, let's, that bill is passed. That is on thin ice, let's just say that. So back to our agenda, the next file for our consideration is Senate File 26, Special District Vacancies. And we're going to go down this list. We might get to Senate File 72, which is also a utility bill, so we have an hour. A little bit less, because we'll try to be prompt getting upstairs. Senate File 26, Special District Vacancies. Senate File, Mr. Rubino, did you have anything on this bill? How are you today? Very good, good to see you. So everybody's, this had, I think this was originally came to us through the Secretary of State's office, if I remember. So Mr. Rubino, it's perfectly appropriate for you to go ahead.
That's correct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Rubino, I'm the Policy Director and Counsel for the Secretary of State's office. First, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I can just do a run through the language of the bill, and then I can go through a little bit of the background and the work during the interim with the committee on the bill. So, the bill deals with the Special District Elections Act and specifically 2229-103, 2229 and 202. As it relates to 2229-103, really that's just a cross-reference to the Special District Elections Act filling by appointment statute. And if you'll just allow me, I'll just go on there and then it'll tie back. I think
You
that's
got
the
it.
best
Go
way.
ahead.
So, filling by appointment, what we had encountered when we submitted this interim topic at the end of the 2023 session was there was some concern with special districts that the remaining board of directors was unilaterally or could unilaterally under existing statute extend the appointment of an appointee to a special district without going through the vacancy filling process or the election process to get to the next election. And so the concern that was brought to our office was just that they didn't like the idea of unilateral extension of a term bypassing the next election. So when we immediately brought that to the committee as an interim topic, of course, in dealing with special districts throughout the state, you're dealing with the Special District Elections Act and Title 22. You're also dealing with the Special Districts Principal Acts, the principal acts that are found in Title 11, Title 18, Title 21, depending on what the special district is. And so throughout the committee, we had, after we brought this, we brought this concern and we had sort of a roundtable with the county clerks, Clerk Freese out of Fremont County, Senator Barlow, Mr. Pepper, and we discussed sort of the issue that we had flagged without stepping into the principal acts of special districts and ensuring that there was just no unilateral extension of an appointment. And so following the testimony from special districts and county clerks, we made slight revisions to the bill, and I think those were presented during the October meeting here in Cheyenne by Senator Barlow. Those were adopted by the committee that would ensure uniform application across special districts, whether the term of appointment lasts through the remainder of the original term or until the next regular election. I believe that the proposed language in Senate File 26 ensures that the intent of the bill is achieved, that is, not to unilaterally extend the term of appointments on a special district regardless of the length of the original appointment, specifically prohibiting any extension beyond the term of office of an appointee shall not be extended in any manner beyond the term of office that the appointee was appointed to fill. And I think that really came out during the interim. We had the remainder of the term, right, for I think it was conservation districts that went through. It was similar to like a legislative district where it went to a date certain. With other terms of special districts, it went just until the next election was had. And so the language there, the key term of the remainder of the term, I think satisfied that and is uniform across all special districts no matter when the term ends.
Okay. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I think it was good cooperative work between the agency and the committee. Are there questions for Mr. Rubino? Did you want to weigh in, Senator Barlow? Not seeing any questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it. Who else would like to address the committee on this bill? Is there anybody in this room? Yes, ma'am. Please come forward. Welcome.
Good morning.
We've got to get a green light on that microphone and pull it real close.
He left it on for me. Wasn't that nice?
That was nice, but still got to pull it closer.
All right. Good morning, Chairman Case, members of the committee. Holly Kennedy with Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. Here speaking in support of the bill. As mentioned previously, this bill directly affects the conservation districts as they do operate as special districts. And so the addition of the terminology to make it go to the end of the term does help out our special districts. Because they are staggered in nature, those positions. And so this, allowing those appointments to go to the end of the term for the person that they're filling will help us maintain that staggered nature on our boards. So speaking in favor.
Thank you very much. And that was Ms. Kennedy.
Yes, sir.
Any questions for Ms. Kennedy? Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Anybody else in this room would like to testify on this bill? I'm not seeing anybody. Is there anybody online that would like to testify on this bill? Yes. Okay. Maybe start bringing them in. Is there a lot?
Just one.
Okay, go ahead. It always takes a little bit. More coffee.
Okay, so jumping in for the chairman, go ahead, Mr. Pepper, if you unmute and join us.
Thank you, Mr. Senator Lennon.
I'm hoping I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Let's get a little closer to your microphone, Mr. Pepper.
Oh, my. Good
Or
morning.
speak louder.
Okay, well, let me see if I can't get it.
We got it. We helped you on this end, so you're good now.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and for the bill. Agree with the clarifying language. Our concern was, as originally written, that it might have required somebody that got appointed to fill out the remainder of a 2-year or a 3-year term, and they were 1 year in, but there was an election coming up that they would have to stand for election and then stand for election again a year later when the term expired. So allowing that the appointee is appointed to fill out the remainder of a term, we agree with the keeping the staggered setup, and so on and for the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Pepper. Questions for Mr. Pepper? Any questions from the committee? Not seeing any questions, Mr. Pepper. Thank you very much for joining us today.
You bet.
Is there anybody else who would like to testify? Not seeing any. Committee, you've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure? Kind of, I think I heard it from I'm so sorry. I'll go with Landon. It could have been Boner. It was like. All right, Senator Landon has the motion. Discussion on the bill? Any discussion? Will we call the roll, please, on this bill?
Senator Barlow. Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Landon.
Aye.
Senator Scott. And Mr. Chairman.
Aye. All right, that's a good one. Senator Barlow, you were involved in this. Would you carry this one on the floor? I'll be glad to. All right, that sounds great. Senator Scott, I'm going to count on you to move the reclamation and decommissioning costs. And if it's okay with the committee, I'll probably take this Senate File 24 integrated resource plans. So that's where we're at this point. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 27, Special Districts Bond Elections Exception. This also was a product of our committee work, and if I recall at a high level, it's to allow folks to it's to allow special districts to be able to apply for grants that might incur some obligations with potential and contingent obligations for future financing, and this would be an exception to requiring a bond election for that. Is that right? Do I have that right, Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, I think you do have that right. I know that Mr. Pepper has been involved with this for, the last couple of sessions. I believe this is one that has been run up the flagpole a couple of times. We worked it pretty diligently during the interim, and I think we got it pretty close to where it needs to go. But, you know, I think certainly we have somebody in Mr. Pepper who can provide some testimony.
So anybody in this room? If not, let's try to get Mr. Pepper on in Zoom land. And we have, here's a problem. In our packet, we have the wrong bill. So, Debbie, right now, we have House Bill 27, not Senate File 27. And so we need Senate File 27. That's the one I've got.
I've got Senate File 27.
Is there a way we can share? I can pull it up electronically. You guys okay? Mine has House Bill, and I'm happy to work House bills. I got a couple ideas about them. But if there's an extra paper copy of Senate File 27, I would appreciate it. And by the way, House Bill 27 is DFS and law enforcement cross-reporting. It was right up our alley.
Well,
okay.
You and I kind of know that bill, Judiciary Committee.
It is a Judiciary Committee bill. Mr. Pepper, I think the easiest way to go would be to just start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously on and for the bill. This bill basically puts special districts that operate and are organized under Chapter 41 and Chapter 18 on the same playing field as municipalities, in that if projects are proposed to be an incurred debt and are to be repaid out of user fees, i.e. rates, then no bond election. It's not considered a bond requiring a bond election. The biggest reason I think that the legislature afforded municipalities the same type of exemption was because of how special elections or elections required under 22-29 line up with application periods with state and federal agencies. I think also the issue that the people have already elected the board to oversee, and these elected boards directly affect the lives of the people and as well as themselves by being elected into those special purpose districts. Again, this just puts them on the same playing field as a municipality. Certainly a special district, if they wanted to, could sit back, raise rates, and sock all the money away into a reserve and then pay for the project out of the reserves at some point. At that point, we're probably looking at increased costs, and they'd probably never be able to acquire enough into reserve. So in this case, they're allowed to swap those reserves with debt. And because of clawback nature in some grant provisions, if the grant if you don't do some of the things that the grant requires, you may have to repay the grant. That's considered a contingent liability. And for that reason, we're in support of the language that you have before you, adding the language in 1812 as well as 41-10. And I'd stand for questions.
Questions for Mr. Pepper? Any questions for Mr. Pepper? Not seeing any. Not seeing any questions. Stand by, Mr. Pepper, because you're probably the most knowledgeable in the room about this. So let's move on. Is there any other testimony on this bill? Is there any other testimony? Are there people online? Senator Boner.
Thank you. Question for Mr. Pepper. Just want to make sure I understand why the restrictions here that it's you can only repay the bonds from fees. What's the reason for that? Just a little bit more explanation would help me.
Did you get that, Mr. Pepper?
I think so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Bonner. If I understood your question, not sure why originally the bond election requirements were in place for municipalities and special districts, requiring that anytime there was a proposed debt from a utility project, it had to go to a vote of the people. That became probably very unruly, very expensive. And I'd like to think it was an oversight by the legislature that when they afforded the exemption in the municipal statutes, that it was an oversight to not include that in chapter 18 and chapter 41. But it certainly is just putting them on the same playing field, allowing for the savings and costs of having to go to special elections, or waiting until the next general election and having that put on the election ballot for board elections or whatever. That's all I can think of, if that answers your question.
Senator Bonner?
Yeah, follow up. So maybe let me put it another way. Is this a requirement? And I'm looking at bottom of page 2, lines 20 to the top of page 3, line 4. Are those requirements also in the municipal statutes that they're equivalent?
Mr. Pepper?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Bonner. If I'm following, I'm just looking at the online version. Are you talking about the proposed exemption language or the language included in like 4110-128?
Senator Bonner?
I'm talking about, so in both sections, there's new paragraph B, then there's a Romanet 1 and 2. I'm talking about the requirements when it says, election shall not be required when, and it has 1 and 2. I'm talking specifically, I'm asking why those are conditions, just a little bit more background, and maybe you can compare it to what's the current case for municipalities.
Mr. Pepper, if you can.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Bonner. LSO wordsmithed the municipal exemption, and the wording is fairly consistent with the municipal exemption, and we have no issues with the substantive wording that they came up with in presenting this bill. And for that, we're on and for. It does maintain the substantive exemption language included in the municipal statutes.
Anything else? Mr. Pepper, if you don't mind, Romanet I in both sections is the one that says repayment is to be made solely from revenues generated by the service with which a finance improvement or service is associated. How specific are those words, by the service? And so, for example, if I were a water district and I wanted to extend service to new customers, and I received a grant to do that, it's clear that the new customers, they will now be contributing, and that'll be the service that would finance the contingent liability. On the other hand, if the grant is used for some kind of general upgrade that affects everyone, then it seems like by the service would extend to the entirety of the utility, for example. So am I on the right track with your thinking on that?
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Chairman, yes. Special districts are organized with a special purpose. And as such, the special purpose, whether it's to extend service within district or to, for instance, do a major mainline repair replacement project that would benefit the entire district, it would be paid for out of the services, i.e. the fees and user charges of the district's residents.
Fair enough. Any other questions for Mr. Pepper? Thank you, Mr. Pepper. Let's find out, would anybody like to testify on this bill? Anybody else? Anybody online? Anybody in the audience? Committee, you've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure? Got a motion by Boner. Discussion on the bill? I don't know if you've noticed, but there's some email traffic against this bill. I think the idea that you can do anything without an election of the people is offensive to some constituents. I just point that out. I don't think there's a lot of credence in this case, because I would argue that, you know, you have to let these entities go for other alternative funding. It's very important. Water entities especially are notoriously unable to raise enough revenue to sustain their operations, and they always need a little bit of help, is my experience. So anyway, anybody else discussion on the bill? Anything else? Would you call the roll, please, Debbie?
Senator Barlow?
Aye.
Senator Boner?
Aye.
Senator Landon?
Aye.
Senator Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman?
Aye. I think I got 4 ayes. So that bill is carried. Who would like to carry that bill? Senator Boner will carry that bill. Okay, the next bill for our consideration is Senate File 72, Utility Donations. This is my personal bill, and I'm just going in numerical order. I'm trying to judge. We got county commissioners and we got utility people. Chairman Landon, would you take us through this bill? I appreciate it. Chair of the committee.
Be glad to, Mr. Chairman. If you want to go ahead and walk us through Senate File 72, I think that'd be a good start.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. This deals with the issue of utility donations, where, you know, utilities are very good corporate citizens. They're involved in our communities, and they frequently they support various community activities. And I think that's fabulous. And typically those costs of those donations are not part of the rate recovery that the customers have. But there is a class of utility donations that sometimes will cause impacts to customers down the road. And it's in a situation where a utility, say, underwrites an upfront capital cost. It might be for renewable energy, for example, and that the ongoing cost of the renewable energy that they have paid for to be installed or helped to pay for to be installed causes a cross subsidy to occur between other customers over time. And that's what I'm trying to get at here. I certainly want utilities to be able to make donations and encourage them to be good corporate citizens. It's the rate impacts on other customers over time that I'm trying to get at with this bill, and say that we have to think about that up front, that if the utility is making these donations, they should probably be responsible for the ongoing costs, which are negatively hurt other customers. In the case of, say, a utility donation for solar facilities, for example, Mr. Chairman, in some utilities we have what's called the net metering tariff in Wyoming. You're all familiar with it. We've covered it. But the upfront capital costs that are gifted by the utility and don't come out of the ratepayers cause ongoing consequences to customer classes, in that the folks that receive the subsidy of the solar facilities are not contributing as much to the capital costs and the fixed costs of the utility as the other customers in the class. This causes a cross-subsidy and a distortion in the rates. It literally means that people that don't have the net metering installations have to pay more the fixed cost of the utility than the people that do have the net metering installations. And if you think about the demographics of who is able to account for this, it means that a lot of poorer customers or poorer businesses are underwriting businesses that receive the free donation. So, and I will say it's not probably businesses. Most of the donations probably go to nonprofits. So that is the bill. It goes in 37-122, which is about general matters to be considered in fixing rates. And it adds a new little section F. That's the bill. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, excuse me, of the sponsor?
Nice job.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, the sponsor's description of what he's trying to do makes considerable sense to me, but I'm having trouble relating that to the actual language in the bill, and maybe the sponsor could. I don't see how the actual language in the bill gets the results you're talking about, particularly in terms of things like net metering and subsidies for that sort of thing.
Senator Case.
Well, thank you, Senator Landon, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think the ongoing costs are costs that are impacting other customers, that they have to pick up the subsidies of that. And so I'd like an accounting to be made, and we would not have this problem, Senator Scott, if our net metering tariffs were compensatory. You know, if they're based on actual costs, we wouldn't worry about this a bit. But we all know now, after going through it for years, that there's built-in cross subsidies in that program that we've not been able to get our arms completely around. And we've not been able to shift this into having the Public Service Commission set the rates. So what this means is that when a utility makes the donation, I'm hoping this requires them to also be responsible for the costs of the cross subsidies that they impose on other customers.
Senator Scott, and we'll come back to you if you have another one, but Senator Barlow, you've got a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when I read this, I think it's much broader than how it's being represented, because when we look at the cost is just numerical. It's a fiduciary, it's a number. But donation is the key to me. What is a donation? And so when I think of a donation, I think of my own checkbook. I write a donation to a food bank. I write a donation to different things. And so I think this is, at least the way I interpret it, is much broader. And I think what you're saying is if you're going to make a donation, now to the sponsor's interpretation, it's of a specific type of donation.
Mm-hmm.
The way I read it, I think it's more broadly applicable. And those donations must come out of the profits or out of the earnings of the entity and cannot be passed on. That's how I read it. I mean, so anyway, so I'm not suggesting that my interpretation is correct. I just think I'm looking at it at the word donation, and the word donation is, I think, bigger than what is encapsulated or is thought about by the good bringer and the chairman of the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So go ahead, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think I disagree with Senator Barlow. I think there are probably some other things. You know, all I'm trying to get at here is there are consequences. A utility can make donations and look like the big hero and get grateful, and we all write letters to support these project things, but there are consequences to those donations. And it's, this came about in the Rocky Mountain Power rate case because I asked the Rocky Mountain Power, the head guy for this branch, about this very issue, that they make donations, yet they cause problems for, the donations cause problems and costs to be incurred by other customers. That's just fundamentally, to me, it's unfair. And they get all the credit for the donations, but they don't have to deal with the costs because that's internalized by the ratepayers. And so literally, I'm looking for a policy that says, if you want to make those donations, fine, but the cost of those donations, your donation policy imposes costs on other ratepayers through cross subsidies. And you have to deal with that as well.
So Senator Case, we've had a couple of senators get stuck a little bit on the language. Going back to Senator Scott, I just want to make sure that you got your question answered with regard to whether the intent of the bill is actually being stated in the bill. Go ahead, if you'd lean up to your microphone, that'd be great, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I'm increasingly persuaded that the bill does not accurately describe what the chairman is seeking to do and would have unintended consequences. I would think a simple amendment or two could fix it. But after yesterday's 16-hour-plus day, I am incapable of writing that particular amendment on the fly.
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Case.
Well, Senator Scott, if we dealt more explicitly with the cross-subsidy issue, would that satisfy you? Because the original version of this talked about including initial and ongoing costs. To me, that is clear that that involves cross-subsidies, but I'm taking it that that's not clear to you, and that's fine. Including ongoing costs through cross-subsidies, for example, is what I'm getting at.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Scott.
And I think you need to mention that what you're after is donations that are related to the provision of the electric power that the utility is providing, or the generation of electric power. Because I think that's where you're really trying to go, Mr. Chairman. And I'm afraid they'd get nailed if they contributed to, say, a Little League baseball team or something like that.
Right.
That doesn't
Well,
really
unless
have
they
anything
sign a
to-
contract that, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Senator Case. I like the conversation because I think everyone's trying to make sure we get to the bill intent and make sure we have the good language in place.
So I think one way to proceed, Mr. Chairman, I think Senator Scott's got excellent thoughts, so does Senator Barlow. There's people that would like to testify to this. They've come and they're online. We should probably get to all that testimony. And I'd be happy if we didn't take action on this bill until later in the day. We're going to be around. We can probably come up with some more language.
Okay, let's go to some testimony then, committee. Since we do have people, I assume that we'll have people weighing in online. I see Ms. Catherman is on the screen.
I think there are people here too. I don't know how you want to do it.
If we've got, I'll tell you what, let's go first to the folks in the room. Any testimony on Senate File 72, if you'd please come forward. Let's keep things moving. Mr. Tracy, yeah, would love to hear from you, and scoot up close to the microphone for us and do the formalities.
Thank you. Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee, my name is Bruce Acey. I'm appearing here today on behalf of Montana Dakota Utilities, and I have to say I agree with everything the chairman said with respect to introducing this bill and the idea that is trying to be addressed here. But the word or the phrase unintended consequences comes to me with respect to this bill, because I can see many times in which, as a utility, we make donations that are benefiting the public, and I don't think those should be excluded automatically. And I think the bill is a little all-encompassing with respect to the word donation, as Senator Barlow picked up in his discussion. And because of that, while we appreciate the intent and what is trying to be accomplished, we do think the bill is overly broad as it's presently set forth. And so we would oppose it in its present form, but certainly support the concept that donations need to be in the public interest and need to benefit the public if they're going to be identified as a cost. And I say that because I think in the present rate-making process, that is the exact process that we have to go through as a utility. Donations are very, very strictly scrutinized by the commission and its staff before we're allowed to pass them on as part of the rate making and place them in rates. And so while I appreciate the intent, I do believe it's being accomplished as part of the process. And so it either asks for an amendment or more defined methodology so that we can move forward. Thank you, and I stand for questions if there are any.
Appreciate that testimony, Mr. Acey. Any questions, Mr. Acey? Thank you very much. Anyone else in the room would like to come forward and testify on Senate File 72? Anyone else in the room? Oh. Public Service Commission, please. I did not mean to overlook you and jump right to testimony. Just trying to get to folks who are online and maybe traveled down, but please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris
Appreciate
Petrie,
Mr.
I'm
Petrie.
Deputy Chairman at the Wyoming Public Service Commission. We understand this bill, and we understand, I believe, what the focus is. I think it's probably a little bit more focused than it appears, as there are very limited circumstances where a utility might be making a donation that's actually going to produce a cost that would potentially fall on ratepayers. And as the chairman explained, this is really about donations in the form of grants that support the construction of somewhat larger net metering installations. And then that ties back to the discussions that we've had off and on for several years now about what appears to be a problem with subsidies that result from net metering customers not paying the ongoing portion of fixed costs that exists in the volumetric rates that customers paid. So we understand it. It appears that it's something that we could easily enough administer, and be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Petrie. Appreciate it. Any questions of Mr. Petrie and the commission? Really appreciate it. Stand by. We may come back to you.
And Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator Case.
I would certainly offer that I really do appreciate that you understand the bill and the commission does. I think you understand it exactly. But I also appreciate that other folks don't think it is clear. And if you had some suggested language that you wish to supply to make it more clear, that would be appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It certainly would. We would welcome that because I think it seems like the tenor here is in favor. We just want to make sure we get language correct. So thank you, Mr. Petrie.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay. Mr. Kaysen, please come forward.
Once again, Rick Kaysen with Rocky Mountain Power, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. I too understand the bill. The company understands the bill and understands the intent of the bill as well. I would like to offer for the record and for understanding, it was mentioned earlier about a rate case and what have you in the program. The program that Rocky Mountain Power does have, would like to share with you that the administrative costs that are associated with that program are not built into rate base. And that has been done with the understanding that it would be a complication for other rate tariffs and everything else. So again, it is not part of our rate base. It is the program that I'm referring to is a voluntary donation by consumers or by customers who provide their dollars into a fund that is separate from everything else to support the program that Mr. Chairman was identifying. It's a self-funded program, if I can identify it as that way. So again, in the spirit of time, and for others to perhaps chat, and excuse me for going down this road, but perhaps the bigger question, and has been raised this morning, is the question about the subsidization and the net metering, which was identified by the Public Service Commission, has been a discussion for several years. And so this is where I excuse myself again. Perhaps it's time to address the expression of elephant in the room, have net metering back as an interim discussion, because I believe there's going to be a lot of electric utility interim topics for 2024. And perhaps this should be there so that we can once and for all perhaps get to the elimination of the subsidization. With that, Mr. Vice Chairman, I'll try to answer questions that you folks may have.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Jason. Any questions? Okay, we'll keep moving along. We're a little short on time. We want to get finished up here in the next 10 minutes because, as you know, we have to get upstairs. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Case.
Just by way of housekeeping, it looks like we probably wouldn't get to the next bill, which would be Senator Cooper's bill, but we would take it up as the first order of business upon the noon recess. Just let people stretch. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
Go
thank
ahead,
you.
Ms. Anderson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shannon Anderson on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council. And we do have a board member online, Maria Catherman, so I'll keep my comments brief so you can make sure to hear from Ms. Catherman. Our organization is 100% all in on energy freedom, and that means we support net metering, the ability of customers to have energy choices in what they do with their private property. And we also support the energy freedom of customers who opt into the Blue Sky tariff, including Ms. Catherman, who will explain that to you. It is an opt-in program. Customers voluntarily give money to this program. The utility voluntarily gives through its foundation to this program. There is no customer impact in rates, no administrative costs are covered by other ratepayers. There's no direct cost shift of the Blue Sky program. If the committee wishes to discuss net metering broadly and the cost shifts that may or may not exist related to net metering, Mr. Chairman, I would contend this is not the vehicle to do that. It's not transparent that that is what the intent is of this bill. I think you would have a room full of people if you wanted to talk about how to set rates under the net metering tariff. Let's not do that with this bill, please. We would contend to you again that we've commissioned a study. We did provide it to the committee previously about the cost shift issue. We looked specifically at residential rates. I would note that the finding of that study showed that there is no cost shift related to residential rates. Blue Sky, of course, is not residential. It is larger facilities, it's commercial. It's, again, it's limited to the 25 kilowatts. There's a whole bunch of issues here. Again, there's citizens across the state that would want to weigh in, and they weren't properly notified that this is the issue that you want to take on with this bill. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would, again, defer to our board member who's on the Zoom.
Okay, Ms. Anderson, thank you. Any questions, Ms. Anderson? Okay, anyone else in the room like to testify? Please come forward.
Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the Commission, Sam Shumway, AARP. Very briefly, when we saw this bill, I appreciated it because I'd had this question about whether or not donations or advertising costs or things like that are passed on to ratepayers in these cases, or whether the utility absorbs those or how they absorb those. Frankly, sitting here today, we've heard sort of mixed testimony on whether that's built into the rate case base or whether that's something separate and apart. It sounds like for Rocky Mountain Power, that's something separate and apart. But the concern is these utilities, these regulated utilities, are monopolies. They have a captive customer base. They don't need to draw in new customers. Their customers aren't going anywhere. And so to make donations or to spend money on advertising, that money seems I question what the purpose of that is when their customers are captive customers. And so to the extent that those costs, donations or advertising costs or things like that are being passed on to ratepayers, we would have a problem with that. And to the extent that this bill would address that, we stand in support of this bill.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions? Okay. Please come forward. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Era Arano, Wyoming Outdoor Council. We oppose this bill for many of the reasons mentioned previously. From our perspective, this is a niche bill and it's not the way to address the discussions of net metering. These programs benefit many community services. For transparency, I'm on the board of the Lander Care and Share Food Bank. We benefit from this program. And as our costs rise, we're able to turn some of those savings into food directly for our clients. Back to Wyoming Outdoor Council. As you heard, no costs from this program are included in base rates, and they're recovered through those donated tariffs. And I'd be happy to share with you the controlling document for the program, which contains a clear statement that should allay any concerns that other customers are funding these beneficial community solar projects. We agree that this is, again, not the way to address the net metering tariff. However, it's important to know that projects are not built on residential meters. They're built on either small general service or general service meters that are offsetting energy costs that are well below the residential rate. These are at 6 cents and 3 cents per kilowatt respectively. This rate is very close to the bulk or avoided cost rate for electricity, and the grantees still pay for the fixed costs and demand charges in the system. With this in mind, it's very difficult for us to see how this volunteer community-based program could contribute to a significant subsidization problem. It's our hope that Wyoming will continue to stay open to volunteer-based programs like this one that are designed to help community groups save on their costs and invest in their communities. We urge you to vote no. I'll stand for questions.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it. Any question? Excuse me. We're going to, it was all that hollering I did last night on the Second Amendment.
You mean at 11:15?
Second Amendments, yeah, and hollering at all of you. Let's go to those online who want to testify on Senate File 72. Ms. Catherman, if you would like to join us, unmute. Tell us who you are, just for the record, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and Chairman Case. First, I'd like to say that I do have always donated to the Blue Sky initiative. I'm trying to start my video. I may not have enough bandwidth to do video as well.
That's
so
quite all right.
Yeah. Okay, can you hear the audio is fine, I hope? So my name is Maria Catherman. I live in rural Converse County. We do have solar panels that we installed ourselves with the help of Range Solar in 2017 and have been really pleased with them. And I'd like to mention to Chairman Case that last snowy winter, I thought of him so many mornings as I was clearing the snow off my panels, because I always remembered him saying no one does that. And I thought, well, maybe not if they're on their roofs, but a lot of us don't have them on the roof. They're built to be easily cleared with just a simple broom, and I do that every time it snows. So, Mr. Case, let's keep thinking of each other every morning. So, the disappointing thing about this, to me, Blue Sky is a great thing, and I want to make clear that those of you that don't know or aren't customers of Rocky Mountain Power, they donate, but also ratepayers, if they choose on a voluntary basis, they also can donate, which I have done, because for me, I think it's an important thing that small places that cannot afford, like the food bank in Lander, as mentioned, that can't maybe afford the infrastructure of solar panels, can still submit for a grant and get it thanks to the generosity of the ratepayers that can afford it. So to me, that's a good community value just there in itself, and I appreciate that Rocky Mountain Power contributes to that as well. This bill is clearly just another way to get at net metering. And so I think let's be clear about that. That's why the language is confusing, because it had to be done backwards and upside down so that net metering was never mentioned. But if you want to deal with net metering, then let's do it honestly. I think that's the way things should function in government, honestly and transparently. And it disappoints me that Senator Case, who usually can be counted on for that, is trying to slip this one by. So the net metering case
Mr.
is.
Chairman, I object to that.
Senator, thank you, but let's keep it on the highway and up at a very high level. And so please continue, Ms. Catherine. We need to wrap up our testimony here pretty quick.
Okay. Yes, the main thing that I would like to mention that there is a lot of politics in the state going into deciding whether there is a global warming issue. There's a lot of politics, and I understand that. I'm not going to get into it. But I think that we need to respect the power company that is trying to do something good with this Blue Sky program, and it has not created any problems. It is functioning, and the net metering debate should be held openly and elsewhere. And an interim topic, I fully support that, Vice Chair Land, and I think that's a wonderful idea to address this in the interim. And I would like to mention that if you're going to look at subsidies, the thing that always strikes me is I know Rocky Mountain Power just put in new lines all along Inez Road. There are 6 households here on Inez Road. And that cost about $5 million per household that it serviced. Now there's a subsidy. If you want to talk about subsidies, there's a subsidy. Because my rate did not go up. And so it had to have been that all the rates go up as a result of that. So let's deal with real subsidies and not try to skin net metering before it's a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Catherine. Really do appreciate you being here this morning. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go to you with this thought. We're 10 minutes out. We've got a heavy day upstairs, a heavy day down here. Where do you want to go from here? There may be a couple more wishing to testify. Evie, nobody? Okay, so we've cleared the deck in terms of testimony. Back to you, Mr. Chairman. What do you want to do with the rest of the meeting this morning? Do you want to carry this one over?
Well, Mr. Chairman, let's do, and let's, just by way of telegraphing where the committee should go, let's deal with the other bills on the committee's desk lift. And if I can get some language from possibly the PSC or others that might satisfy Senator Scott, we can take it up at the very end.
I think that sounds like a good suggestion from my standpoint. I hope the language is such that, we're not zeroed in on one particular program here. I think this is a concept that I'd like to flesh out and get a better understanding of it. I think it has merit, and hopefully we can get there. So
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I really resent being attacked every time I turn around. Utility costs that are forced on other customers due to utility policies are significant, and they're important, and they're becoming increasingly. And I see this as an economy, as including all the ongoing costs. To me, it's very clear, and I absolutely resent and that I'm being called out as being nefarious. And that really makes me angry, Mr. Chairman. So it is, and there are other policies that might possibly impose costs on customers down the road that we need to think about. And that's fair game. So let's come back at 15 minutes after noon recess, and we'll take up Senator Cooper's bill, which is the dissolution of special districts. And if we have language for the committee to consider, we'll do it at the very end of the day. Thank you.
Yeah, I promised to get you language, but
We'll see what they come up with.
Give a chance on it.